Good afternoon and welcome to today's Trust Tour. We're thrilled to be back at the Philadelphia Museum of Art for another very special opportunity to see a collector's vision, which highlights. And we're grateful to have the opportunity to tour the show today with Richard Dietrich III, who is the son of Richard Dietrich Jr., who created the foundation, and then Debbie Rebuck, the longtime curator of the Dietrich American Foundation, who are both also members of the Decorative Arts Trust. So we have to extend our gratitude on two different fronts. But thank you so much for allowing us this pleasure and privilege. And please, without further ado, take it away, Richard.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much. Carrie, thank you. I am so excited to be here and to be sharing in the collector's vision, highlights of the Dietrich American Foundation, with everybody who's joining through this live stream. And then I know that this is going to live on YouTube, I guess. So that's wonderful that people will get a chance to see the show. This show, which Debbie curated, which Debbie conceived of, this whole idea of the show, is something that as a foundation we, for a few years, were really thinking that we wanted to do. And we wanted to do it in conjunction with this book, In Pursuit of History, A Lifetime Collecting Colonial Art and Artifacts. The book came out at the end of January. The show opened really February 1st with an official open of February 7th. And it was supposed to run until June 7th. And then, of course, everything changed with COVID, and the museum was shut down in mid-March, and the show kind of went into a suspended animation. And we were very heartened by the numbers of people who were visiting before it shut down. And we're also very grateful to the museum that when the museum opened back up in September, the show opened back up with it. And the show is going to be running until November 15th. This first vignette that you see is something that really is kind of a great entryway to the show. It is among the first items that my father collected in the area of fine and decorative art. This wonderful bombe form, you can see this Nathaniel Gould desk, was something that he bought at the age of 25 in 1963. And then 1 year later, he bought this wonderful portrait of a boy named John B. Holmes. And Holmes was 6 years old when he was painted by John Singleton Copley. So both these things were items that actually resided in my father's house together with this Paul Revere teapot and then Paul Revere's view of the year 1765. And so Debbie wanted to kind of reunite the items that had all been together in the home in the show. And this was something that my father loved to do, was to kind of bring historical pieces and time periods and figures together. And it just so happens that the happy coincidence is also that he purchased them around the same time at such a young age. This was really the first major piece of furniture that he purchased and the first major painting that he purchased. The Revere teapot, the other great connection here is that the Paul Revere teapot, we believe very much is the same one that Revere holds in the John Singleton Copley portrait that's at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. And then, of course, the Revere print is just a nice connection. And those two sat on the top of the desk in the home, and other things were up there, and they weren't in this very elaborate and safe protective case. They probably should have been, but they weren't. So, and then, I don't know, Carrie, if you can zoom into the photo, or if you already did, of them installed in the home. But just really briefly, the Dietrich American Foundation, what we are is we're basically a lending library of art and artifacts. And our collection numbers about 2,600 pieces. About 1,200 of those are actually books and manuscripts. That was the first love of my father, was collecting books and then collecting rare books and manuscripts. And most of those objects actually reside at Wesleyan University in the special collections there. And then the other objects, the decorative and fine art pieces and artifacts, a big chunk of those reside here at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. We're really grateful for that relationship. It's been a long-standing one with the museum. Early on, my father decided that he really wanted to do this, to collect objects, to share them with people. And he thought maybe to build a museum, to do something to create a museum. And then equally early on, he realized that there were plenty of museums and that this one in particular was a very special museum, and he wanted to get involved. And so he got involved in the early mid-60s, and he continued that involvement through his life, donating pieces, putting things on decades-long loans, and really trying to support the museum however he can. And we're proud as a foundation to continue that work. So I'm going to turn it over now to Debbie.
I'm really happy to be able to have this opportunity to show the exhibit to all of you who won't be able to make it in the next couple weeks, but I do hope that some of you will have a chance to come. When I was trying to design the exhibit, of course it's always hard to select what objects and how to display them. As Richard said, we have about 2,600 objects in the Foundation's collection. In the book, we feature 162 different objects, but of course in this gallery, I can't fit 162 objects. And so I did find a way to include 55 objects, and I wanted to divide it out into different sections of Richard's interests. And he wasn't, some of you may know him as a furniture collector, some of you know him as a silver collector, some of you know him as a book collector, but really he was all of the above. And he enjoyed mixing different mediums together. And as Richard showed you with the vignette from his living room, that's really how he thought about his entire collecting process, was to collect things that would tell a story, that served as a link to history and allowed him to know more about the object through who owned it. He has many objects with extensive family provenance, many objects that are signed or by a known maker, and that was important to him. The first half of this exhibit is basically Pennsylvania objects, and it's important to include all of the Pennsylvania objects because, of course, Richard grew up in Villanova outside of Philadelphia. Philadelphia was, of course, a leading center in the years up to the Revolution as the home of the Constitutional Convention and the signing of the Declaration, etc. So I did divide the first section into Pennsylvania, and this first grouping of objects is from Philadelphia. Probably many people know the famous Cadwallader gaming table, which is one of a pair. The other one is owned by the Philadelphia Museum of Art. This table, of course, has an extensive history. There are known documents and invoices that document who made it, who upholstered the other objects that General Cadwallader purchased. I love that Affleck billed Cadwallader for this table in 1770, and Richard actually bought it from a dealer in 1970. So it seems somehow fitting that 200 years later, this came into his collection. And it is just the epitome of Rococo carving and the high design of Philadelphia craftsmanship at that time. And another obvious choice for him was the scroll-foot side chair here next to it, which dates from about 1760 to 1770. Our chair is numbered 8. There are 6 or 7 of the 8 that are known. Perhaps there were more, but 8 is the highest number on one of these pieces. But many people, many cabinet makers in the 18th century were aware of Chippendale's Director that was published in 1754. They usually just kind of picked and chose certain elements when they were designing what they were creating. But this chair really follows so closely plate 12 from the Chippendale's Director, which we have an image of on the label rail here. Richard was fascinated with this, and so of course when he purchased the chair, he made sure that he also was able to acquire a print, the actual print from Chippendale's Director. But as much as he loved the the high style Philadelphia furniture. He loved just as much the early furniture from the early part of the century in Philadelphia. And he was really thrilled to acquire this scripter, or cabinet over drawers, in 2004 from the Jeffords sale. And when he acquired it, there was a series of steps on top of the cabinet that had been added in the 19th century to display china. It also had very 19th century brasses, round brasses on the drawers. We removed these steps very easily, they came right off, and then changed the brasses to brasses that were more typical of the time period. The cabinet on top opens to reveal 24 little cubicles that we assume were used for filing receipts and papers, and then a series of 2 sets of drawers. There was also originally a hinged tabletop inside of the doors that would fold down to be a writing surface. We did not replace that, although there are markings on the side of the case that show where that wood piece would have worn away as it was pulled out. The little cabinet here measures only 5'4". I really wish that it could be on the floor instead of on the platform, because then you get a real sense of just how small and personal an object it is. And in addition to Richard just being fascinated with the form, he also loved the family history of it. It was owned by Thomas Graham, who came to Philadelphia with Sir William Keith, who was the deputy governor of Pennsylvania. And it then went to his daughter, Elizabeth Graham Ferguson. And she actually had an inventory taken when she left the home, Graham Park, which is outside of Philadelphia in Horsham, PA. And in the inventory in her bedchamber is listed one small cabinet that we believe is this cabinet. So it's just a great combination of family history, local, early, that appealed to Richard very much. In addition to the Philadelphia objects, he also collected a lot from the Lancaster and Chester County area outside of Philadelphia. The Dietrich family came to America in 1767. Their first relative, Adam Dietrich, settled in Berks County. And so because of that, Richard had a strong interest in purchasing objects from that area. In addition, he did purchase his own home in 1966, Arcadia in Chester County. And that's a home that Richard Jr. and his brother and sister grew up in. And Richard really felt that it was important to furnish the home with some of the objects that would have been there at the time. And so he was very interested in Chester County line and berry furniture, such as the Chester drawers in the corner with the spice cabinet on top. And we have several pieces, a desk, another Chester drawers. He also collected a lot of Chester County wainscot side chairs. And it all had a real meaning to him since he lived in that area. One of the objects that he collected that was from Lancaster County is this wonderful Hoff tall case clock. And this was purchased in 1998 at a Horst auction. The clockworks were made by George Hoff, who was trained in Germany. He came to Philadelphia in 1765. By 1766, he was living in Lancaster. This clock is dated 1768, so it's probably one of the earliest of, the pieces that he made here in Pennsylvania. We don't know who the case was made by, but when this was purchased, it actually was about 4 inches shorter, because at some point in the life of the clock, somebody moved into a home that didn't have a high enough ceiling, and so they telescoped the case down into the base. And they actually just took off the molding, slid it down about 3.5 to 4 inches, and then put the base molding back on. But luckily it was all intact when it was acquired. We sent it to a conservator who was able to pull it back up. But in the restoration process, he put a lacquer finish over the entire piece to blend the finishes together and the coloring. And it tended to yellow the pewter inlay, so much so that it was assumed that it was actually brass inlay and not pewter until we did our conservation survey several years ago. Chris Storb worked on this piece, and he decided to just do a little testing on some of the inlay, and in cleaning it, discovered that it was actually pewter. And when we removed it all, it's like the piece came to life. The date now stands out. If you look closely at the inlay, which is a variety of different hardwoods, it is outlined with a string of pewter. And it really, those columns up at the top on either side of the dial, they had looked, darker. Now the lightness, comes out. So it really brought the case to life, and we're really grateful to the work that Chris Storb did for this piece and for the other pieces in the collection. Another area that he collected in the Pennsylvania German area was Fraktur. And we have about 125 different Fraktur in the collection. Fraktur are these wonderful watercolors on paper, usually very colorful and bright. They were normally done by schoolmasters and frequently were not signed. There's a variety of different types of Fraktur, from birth certificates, baptismal certificates, house blessings, writing exercises where a schoolmaster would write out the alphabet for children to copy, little rewards of merit. And these tended to be done by anonymous schoolmasters. And over the years, they can be attributed sometimes to a person who did it. Sometimes we come up with funny names like the cross-legged angel artist or the dotted one artist. But fortunately, in some cases, they were signed. And over the years, Richard was able to collect a lot of pieces that were actually signed by the schoolmaster or the Fraktur artist who did it. So the piece that Carrie is looking at right now was signed by Heinrich Engelhard. And then we have a drawing here with two birds and the tulip that's signed in the corner by Christian Bamberger. At the time, that was the only known Christian Bamberger piece. Richard bought that early in his collecting, but now there are 5 or 6, I believe, known, signed by him. And then this beautiful birth certificate from Lancaster County is signed Henry Duce, and there are really only a couple known by him. So again, it was the way that Richard loved to connect. He found that by knowing who the artists were, by knowing the families, who these pieces were made for, it brought history to life for him. And that was really what collecting was all about for him.
So this section is an interesting section. It's the Dietrich American Foundation, and a number of objects that are in this section are not made in America. They are wares that are either from the China trade, made in China, or they're Asian influenced. And so, for instance, this great painting by the Chinese artist Lam Qua, that was his Pidgin English name, from around 1835 is of a Hong merchant. And it was painted by Lam Qua to give to an American sea captain who would have worked with this Hong merchant. And you can see there are various things on this that denote rank. And so this little sort of ball on the cap, this badge that he wears, all those things are showing the rank of this civil servant whose job was to interact with the American traders and European traders. And what's wonderful, I think, about this is a real East meets West, because the American family would have this in their home, and they'd proudly show who they work with in China. And it's such a, it's a very warm depiction of this person painted by a Chinese artist. In this case, we have Chinese export porcelain, the kind of things that the sea captains would be bringing back on their ships. And this wonderful bowl shows the various quote-unquote factories that were really the foreign offices in Canton for the American and European traders. And then the center of the bowl, if you can zoom in, is actually the same image that's on the back of our book. And the section in the book, this was written by Debbie Rebuck, the section on Chinese export. And the whole exhibit really has pieces that relate to all the different sections of the book, save for the only one that seems to be really not represented is the first section of the book on books and manuscripts. And that's something that we do hope to do an exhibit at the Museum of the American Revolution a year from now, or maybe a little bit longer due to COVID. But we are really, with this, as we put this together, things are kind of mixed. Even this section has paintings. Kathy Foster wrote the section in the book on paintings. She's also on the board of the Dietrich American Foundation. And then David Barquest wrote on silver, and silver is sort of interspersed throughout this exhibit. David is also on the board of the foundation and works for the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And then Ned Cook wrote on furniture. Lisa Minardi wrote on Pennsylvania German related items. And then we have a section on whale trade that you'll see later. And that was a gentleman named Michael Dyer at the New Bedford Whaling Museum. And then Maury Heckscher wrote the foreword, and Maury's also on the board, and Ned is on the board of the foundation. Really briefly, the board is those four professionals I just mentioned, and then also it's rounded out by family, my brother, my sister, her husband Jesse, and also my wife Ginger and me. So another item that I'd love to show you, and I'll maybe move over here. This is this wonderful high chest by John Brocas. And this is something that was recently featured. Chris Storb did the conservation work on this, and Chris wrote the first of a series of 4 articles in Antiques and Fine Art, and he wrote on this piece. And this is just an incredible, this is this japanned look, so this sort of faux lacquer and then thick gesso paint. And it's very much an American piece, and it's from 1733, Boston, but it's very much in this Asian tradition. And I think, again, this is really an incredible thing. Most of the American China trade is all happening in the 1810s, 1830s, and this is something that this Asian influence very early on. Debbie mentioned Chris's work on the furniture survey. Chris did an incredible job surveying all of the furniture in the collection and doing research and also conservation work. And I invite people to go to Chris's blog. It's called In Proportion to the Trouble. And it's just a wonderful detail of the kind of projects that he's done for the foundation, including the full story, and even more that wasn't able to go into the full story is on his blog.
So in this section of the exhibit, even though we've had a few other New England pieces with the Gould desk and the japanned high chest, I had to put these masterpieces, I believe, of New England furniture in the exhibit. So here we have a bureau table that is from Newport. The top drawer, on the back of it is inscribed Daniel Goddard, his drawers. And this form was popular in the 18th century. I believe there's about 60 of these bureau tables made in Newport, and about half of them have a door like you see in the center here. And about half of them are done with the block and shell decoration as you see on this piece. But I feel like this piece really has all the bells and whistles. It has the lattice work around the blocked shells. It has the gadrooning around the base, and then these wonderful acanthus leaves on the feet. So, and in addition, is just one of the finest pieces of mahogany that I think you could find. So it really is a wonderful piece. Richard purchased this and this other table that I have on display here, the slate top table from Boston. He purchased both of these from Israel Sack. in 1968 and 1969. This table, I think there are about 10 known. The top was actually imported from Switzerland, the slate and then the decoration around the top are all done in Switzerland and then brought back to Boston. All 10 that are known are from the Boston area with the trumpet type turning on the legs and the stretchers. And then we wanted to show our other Copley portrait. We actually have another Copley of a woman who is on loan to the Cincinnati Museum. But this portrait of Josiah Quincy, I think, is just monumental. Copley really had a way of humanizing his sitters, and I feel like if you stand here a while, you can think that he's ready to talk to you. It's in a very elaborate frame that was not originally on this portrait, but was on another Copley portrait. The portrait was from New York, and we have done a wood sampling on the frame. It is Eastern white pine, so we do believe it was made in New York. The next section in the back part of the gallery is on George Washington. And as with the other areas, Richard loved Washington, he admired him, and so he looked for objects in a variety of different mediums. So we have, a portrait of Washington here by Charles Peale Polk. We have the history portrait of Washington crossing the Delaware by Edward Hicks. I don't have it in the exhibit, it's on loan to Mount Vernon, but we have a pair of scrimshaw teeth that are scrimshawed with George and Martha Washington. And then we have a large collection of porcelain with Washington-related themes. And I think I should also say that we have 60 letters in our manuscript collection that were signed by, or letters from Washington, as well as books from his personal library. But the platter here that Carrie is focusing on is a piece of the Society of the Cincinnati service that George Washington bought. The service, 302 pieces. This platter and a plate were actually the first pieces that Richard Dietrich purchased for the foundation. He went to a lecture in 1963 given by Eleanor Gordon on porcelain, and he purchased this platter and a plate from the service. He went on to purchase 19 other examples of Washington's service, as well as examples of Society of the Cincinnati services owned by Samuel Shaw and Henry Knox, other members of the Society of the Cincinnati. But the relationship with Eleanor Gordon wasn't limited just to where he made his first purchase, but also Eleanor and her husband Horace really became advisors to Richard over the years. And Horace, in particular, acted as an intermediary for Richard with different dealers. And they were became very close family friends. We had, at one point, over 500 pieces of porcelain in the collection, the majority of which were purchased from Eleanor Gordon over the years. So they really had quite an impact on the foundation as it is today. Another early purchase that Richard made from the James Graham Galleries actually was this wonderful miniature of Washington done by James Peale in 1788. It is signed and dated by him. We believe that it was painted at the same time that James's older brother, Charles Wilson Peale, was painting a large portrait of Washington. But this little miniature was put on a snuff box. It stayed in the Peale family for years until it was sold to a volunteer militia company in Philadelphia in 1843. And at that time, they put it into this wonderful commemorative gold watch case. The front of the case has a design of Washington crossing the Delaware. The back of the case has a view of Mount Vernon, and there is a little compartment behind the miniature that actually has a lock of Washington's hair. So it is the ultimate memento of Washington. The two other pieces here of porcelain that relate to Washington, this is a little custard cup that has a view of Washington's tomb. But Washington's tomb wasn't actually even erected until the 1830s. And this piece was done soon after Washington's death in 1799. And they just took, the weeping willow and a monument that, seemed to be of the time period as a way of commemorating Washington's death. The other one, the bowl here, has a view of Mount Vernon. The next sections relate to the sea, and that's what Richard is going to talk about.
This section is related to the whale trade and sailor-made objects. And this, as you can see, is a bent part of a harpoon. The wood would have been the longest part, and then this piece that goes in. And the only way to describe this is that the harpoon was bent with the action of the whale as the whale was harpooned. So it's kind of an incredible artifact. The foundation has a number of things related to this area of history, to the whale trade, both whaling implements like the harpoon, and then also these sailor-made objects, either scrim-shandered on whales' teeth, the teeth of sperm whales, or on whale bone. And the teeth are, I think, really quite incredible, especially that the one single tooth there is from the whale ship Susan, and so that's one of the famed Susan's teeth. And the sailor who made this was early on. It was a fellow named Frederick Merrick, and Merrick was scrim-shandering these teeth over a course of 3 years in the Pacific. And he was exceptionally good at it, and but also it was early on, and so these are very rare objects. The foundation has 2 of them. I think what's also incredible are that so many of these teeth, we don't know the name of the artist. We just know that they relate to other teeth that you see. So for instance, there's one that's not in the display, but there's one that we have that's actually of the campus at Wesleyan University, and that was by a scrim-shander that we only know as the Connecticut Cityscape engraver. And so that's what this folk artist would do, is do these scenes of Connecticut cityscapes. And then we have this plate bone, which was part of the jaw of the whale. And here, this is a scene of the Indian Ocean and of the activity trying to hunt whales in a whale ship in the background. And then the far object is a really incredible ditty box, what it was called, and it's a scene of Boston Harbor with various figures. And the kind of craftsmanship is just really incredible, and I think that it speaks to the kind of time that these sailors had. So there were moments of kind of terror when they were hunting the whales, and then intense activity processing the whale oil, but then there would be all this free time, and these were truly self-taught, what we'd call today maybe outsider artists. And so many of them we only know that about them because of what they created. So this is then a painting of a whale ship. And again, whaling is one of these things. It's later than the colonial period. It's something that my father was just so fascinated by, the maritime story. It relates to the China trade, the story of the sea, of America venturing out. But again, the whale trade is a significant area of the collection. And in the book, Michael Dyer at the New Bedford Whaling Museum did a really beautiful job. This wonderful little painting is of a whale oil shop at 55 Chestnut Street in Philadelphia. And this is by Joseph Schumacher Russell. And he painted this in 1818. And it's just an incredible depiction. He also owned the shop. So he's painting what he owns. And it's, again, something that's small and very precious. And then if we come over here, another part of the maritime interest in the collection was the War of 1812. And so there was this interest that my father had in naval history. And that was really, there was of course a Navy in the Revolutionary War, but it wasn't until after the Revolutionary War that the United States really became a naval power. And this jug is a depiction of the fight between the Wasp and the Reindeer. And the Wasp is a U.S. ship, and it was commanded by Blakely, by Johnston Blakely. And he defeated the Reindeer and captured the ship. And one of the things Blakely was doing is he was actually kind of taking the fight to the British. He was harassing British shipping in the English Channel. And then we have this wonderful gold presentation medal. And these were quite common in the War of 1812, and they were awarded to captains, and there would also be financial rewards for crew if they captured or destroyed British ships. And in this case, this was awarded in 1814, and it was awarded to his family because the Wasp and also Blakely died in 1814. And so he never actually saw this, but this is a rather large piece. It's 7 ounces of pure gold. And then here we have another piece of export porcelain. But then I'd like to just turn attention to this this painting. This again is War of 1812, and here we have the USS Constitution fighting the Guerrière, the British ship. And this was painted by a French artist, Ambroise Louis Garneret, and he was in fact a sailor. Kathy Foster in her section describes that he was a sailor in the Napoleonic War, and so he really had this intimate knowledge of ship handling, of rigging, of sails, and you can just really see that the way he's captured this image. And after that surprise success of the Constitution and the defeat of various British ships, there was this newfound interest in the U.S. Navy and in the Constitution, and so pictures like this came up and were pretty widely painted and distributed.
Well, Richard and Debbie, thank you so much. That was an incredible introduction to this extremely rich exhibition and the opportunity to highlight so many different areas of your father's collecting passions was beautifully done, Debbie, so congratulations to you. And what I love most about the show is there are items that are both representative of very important types of objects that major 20th century collectors fought for, but also extremely unique items that are only represented here in the Dietrich American Foundation, which is a wonderful thing in such an intimate space to be able to combine so many different highlights of artistic pursuit across time and place. So congratulations and thank you for this chance.
Thank you.
One question that I'm sure our participants will like to hear, having been on the tour with Alexander last month with the now closed American Art Galleries, is how will the Dietrich American Foundation collection be folded into the new spaces when those reopen?
Well, they will actually be using several of the objects. Actually, I think the latest list I saw was between 58 and 60 objects from the foundation will be on view in the new galleries. A combination of silver, of Chinese export porcelain, of furniture, and of paintings. But of course, there are some objects that were on view in the galleries here that will no longer go in because they're doing a whole new interpretive plan. But we will still be continuing the long loan history that we have with the museum, and we're really pleased and happy to be doing that. I think I wanted to say and forgot that when I started that this portrait of by Robert Feek was actually one of the very few first objects that we placed on loan to the Philadelphia Museum of Art back in 1969, and it has been here ever since. So we do have a really long and wonderful relationship with PMA, and we do hope to continue that.
Splendid. Now, for those of you at home, if you have questions, please put them into YouTube, and I'll be happy to relay them in the few minutes we have remaining. Now, in terms of the other outside museums that you're working with, and from the lending library model that your father created, at an incredibly young age. To think at 25 he was out buying a Bombay chest, a Copley portrait, and creating this extraordinary institution that's become the Dietrich American Foundation. How many different organizations besides Wesleyan and the PMA are you working with for outgoing loans?
Debbie informed me that the count is 28 right now. Typically, it's been about 30, sometimes up to 35. I will say that we do have objects that need places that, we'd love to continue to put things on loan to other places. So if there is somebody who's watching who, wants to get in touch with us about our website is DietrichAmericanFoundation.org, and there's quite a good searchability of our collection on the site through a program called Past Perfect, and there's also a way to contact us. And so really lending is something that we are so excited to do and continue to do. And that relationship that Debbie mentioned with the Philadelphia Museum of Art, that is really a special relationship, and we're thrilled that so many of our objects will go into those new galleries. And seeing that talk, Alexandra's virtual tour, was great and sort of bittersweet, seeing those galleries shutting down, but these new galleries are going to be really incredible, and I think that the open is, I believe, May of 2021 is the plan.
But don't be intimidated and think that if you're an institution, you need to have a painting for 51 years. But because we do short-term loans, we lend objects for special exhibits, for just a couple months, or we put objects on loan for 3 to 5 years. We really are happy to work with institutions to find out what fulfills their needs. And we don't mind when an object is returned, because oftentimes it's because a borrowing institution, a patron comes through and says, oh my goodness, I didn't know you were interested in Chippendale chairs. I have one and I'll donate it. And we love that kind of story. The idea is to get objects out there to educate the public, and we're happy when institutions are able to use our objects, and happy when they're able to add to their own collections.
Now, for those who haven't had an opportunity to purchase the book, is it available on Amazon, or where can people acquire it?
Yes, it actually is. It's really wherever books are sold. Yale University Press has a promo that they'll do 25% off, and it's normally $50, and I believe that the code is YEIPH. So IPH is in pursuit of history, and then YE, I'm not sure what, Yale, E something, I don't, but anyway, YEIPH. And so if you go to Yale Press website, but of course you could purchase it on Amazon or any other bookseller can order it.
Yes, or if you come and see the exhibit here at PMA, the bookshop here does carry copies of it too.
Great
So,
point, yes, yes.
But the book will live on past the exhibit.
Yeah.
And then one question about the scrutoire, coincidentally here in front of us. You mentioned purchased in 2004 at the Great Jeffords sale in Sotheby's. Such an exciting moment in the Americana field when miniature came home with its stretch case cloth. And you mentioned this being in the hands of a female descendant. Given the dimensions of the scrutoire, is it thought that it was made specifically for the use of a woman, or do you think
I don't think so, because it was actually owned by her father, and it just went to her as the last surviving relative. And actually, she was married at the time, but her husband had been a loyalist and worked under General Howe. So after the war, he went back to England. All of his belongings were sold, confiscated here in America, but she was able to prove that this was from her family and in her personal assets. And so this, along with some of her personal things, she was able to keep. But I think, I think if it was standing here in front of you, you would feel okay sitting at it. It's small, but it
But
would
such a
work for
rare
you.
object as well.
It is.
Very few of this form would survive.
Yeah.
And 2004, would this been one of the last major acquisitions that went into the foundation?
Probably the last piece of furniture that came into the collection. Richard was still collecting porcelain in 2005. I know we bought a document in 2006 and passed away in 2007. So he was collecting up till the end, but I think this was the last piece of furniture that he purchased. Yeah.
And Richard, what was it like for you and your siblings to grow up in a household surrounded by so many incredible objects?
It was really, I mean, he really lived with these objects, and we all lived with these objects. I will say, though, that first vignette, as the first thing that I described, was in our formal living room, and that's where he put some of the real gems of the collection. A lot of things had been donated to the foundation earlier and were not in the house, but those were some of the items that were still in the house. And it was a room that we didn't go into very often. So it was one of those rooms where, you know, he'd sort of see you leaving that room and say, what were you doing in the living room? But everywhere else in the house was very, very comfortable. And so for me and my brother and sister, you know, he was just a great history teacher, and he loved these objects, and he was passionate. It was really the history that he was passionate about. And he'd constantly be imparting stories about things, and that connecting of objects was something that he loved, and it rubbed off, you know. It was a wonderful place to grow up.
Well, Richard and Debbie, we're so grateful for your time today and for this incredible opportunity and privilege, so thank you. And thank you all at home who are with us watching on YouTube Live. You can stay tuned for our next Trust Tour, which will be on November 10th with Ralph Harvard at the Abel Nicholson House in Salem, New Jersey, which is surely an event not to miss. And thank you again. The show closes November 15th.
That's
is that
correct.
right? So
Yes.
Thank
if you're
you.
planning a trip to the Philadelphia area, please make sure to include this on your visit. And we hope you stay well, and we remain grateful for all your support. Thank you and have a great day.
Matt, thank you.
Thank you.
Gary, thank you.